This is another instructional video on PicaSim. This is the flight simulators uh, glider with flaps assignment here. This is Duke, and I'm just going to walk you through this assignment, give you a little help with how to get it started, and explain a bit. So just like our other assignments, this is in PicaSim. Of course, if you have another simulator you're using, it might be slightly different. But here, I want you guys to try to experience a little bit of what flaps do to an aircraft. Unfortunately, I can't find any models in PicaSim that are powered planes that have flaps, like like an FT Explorer type plane or something like that. All I can find is gliders, so we'll just use a glider, but I think it'll still help understand a little bit of what flaps do in flight. And so in this assignment, you're going to take a video, a screen recording, of at least 60 seconds of you flying an unpowered DLG discus launch glider in the slope location in PicaSim. And a screenshot of the glider I want you to use and the location that I think is good to use here. You could try other ones if you want to, I guess, but they should work fine. And so basically in this flight, you're going to just experiment with the flaps and see what they do. We've talked about flaps in class, but it'll be nice to see what this does to the aircraft in flight. If you wanted to, you could add flaps to your FT Explorer this semester, or you could add something called flaperons, which is kind of what this glider has actually. A mixture of flaps and ailerons on the same control surface. But we'll take a look at PicaSim here and see what we can see, and you need to fly that around for a minute or so and play with that plane. Okay, that's to help you understand how flaps work. All right, so we're going to go over here PicaSim here. Let me change this up. Okay, here's PicaSim, and hopefully there's wind noise on this level because it's windy, but I turned that off, so hopefully that is not in the video. I think we're good. And so here in PicaSim, I've already selected the location and the glider that I showed you in the Canvas assignment. And by default, this glider doesn't have a motor, of course, so by default, the throttle sticks here on the left-hand side of the screen. You'll see that moves both my flaps and my elevator a little bit, which is kind of interesting. You're like, why is it doing that, right? And so, in the absence of a throttle, as far as the plane goes, I guess the developer decided to set it up this way. I think this is common on gliders in general. Since you don't have a throttle you need to control, maybe you can control your flaps with a throttle stick. I'm not sure on that. I've never really flown gliders in real life, but it kind of makes sense to me. So over here, as I move my throttle stick up and down, we can see the flaperons in this case. They're the flaps and the ailerons moving down together and then up together. And it's a little bit hard to see at this angle, but they're both moving down at the same time and up at the same time. And if I move my ailerons with my right stick over here, we can see they move up and down in opposite fashion, just like ailerons are supposed to. So you say, well, what happens if you have flaps down and ailerons? Well, it still works. They just start at a more downward position before they do their aileron movements versus a more upward position. So you can see that the movement changes slightly there. If I keep the aileron stick over to one side and then move the flaps accordingly, but they still stay in a aileron position, if that makes sense. They're still going to make the aircraft roll even if your flaps are down. So these are called flaperons, right? The flaps and ailerons are together versus having separate flap control surfaces from the ailerons. Something else you notice interesting about this is when the flaps go down, when I move my throttle stick up, the elevator also deflects. So they've mixed, and it's called mixing, mix the control surfaces together a little bit. So when you put your flaps down, it creates a lot more lift on the airplane and tends to kind of balloon up or want to gain lift, so put the nose up perhaps. And so we have a little bit of down elevator that happens at the same time. You can see right here. I'm not moving my elevator stick at all, but it is moving by itself with my throttle stick, which is in reality my flaps, if that makes sense on this aircraft. So they mix that in by default on the simulator, and that's fine. You can do that same sort of a mix on your FT Explorer if you're going to deploy flaps there, so you don't just nose up and stall the airplane if you're trying to use flaps on landing or something like that. Okay. Now I'm not a pro glider pilot by any means, so I might be doing the gliding kind of flight incorrectly or not the best technique, but for the purpose of this assignment, I just want you to experience what flaps do to the airplane. So when you start off like this, I'm going to recommend you instead click on this eyeball and go to the view, not the FPV view, but like kind of the chase view of the airplane. And we can see the flaps again here and the elevator moving together. This is a way to allow you to keep the plane in sight and see how the flaps affect things. It also makes it a little bit easier to fly in this kind of scenario that you're unfamiliar with probably, and keep it in the air for the full 60 seconds like you need to do for the assignment requirements. So I'm going to start with the flaps on, I guess if that makes sense, or deployed. So with my throttle stick at the top, and I have my full other movements here, rudder, or elevator, and ailerons. I'll hit play or start. Okay, so the plane will get thrown up in the air, and the view gets a little bit confusing for a minute here because it goes almost straight vertical, and then you can kind of start getting into a glide. And my flaps here, I can drop the flaps and see how the plane changes a little bit. It's actually almost going like too fast into the wind, I think is why the tail's waggling like that. But I'm flying directly into the wind. If I deploy the flaps, the plane definitely climbs a little bit. And if I drop the flaps, it will dive a little bit. So we can try getting down here a little bit and then try for kind of gliding back up the slope. Like I said, I don't really know what I'm doing with gliders, but this kind of gives you a feel for it a little bit perhaps. And as you raise and lower the flaps, you can see the difference in the flight characteristics there. Just keeping the plane up in the air for about 60 seconds is what I'm asking you for. And so as we go flying along here, you can just see that difference. Okay. And you see my ailerons still work when my flaps are deployed, right? So I can still roll the plane over and around and everything. Let's turn up one now, and you can see that my speed up on there on the top of the screen here will change drastically when I'm flying into the wind versus with the wind, right? And we'll need to go back into the wind there to get some more lift. Try to climb a bit now, maybe. See if we have enough lift to climb with the flaps. I might have lost it. Too low now. I can't catch that wind. Um, but give it a shot. Play around with the flaps a little bit. See what it does for your airplane. You can actually have smoke set up on this airplane randomly, so I can turn smoke on and off. But see what it does for your airplane. See how it feels. Flaps on a powered airplane are typically used for landing and takeoffs. So having the flaps up could help you come in for a nice slower landing with lots of extra lift. Let's see if we can just land the plane here. Maybe into the wind. There we go. We'll drop flaps to dive a little bit. I'll land in the water here. Okay. There we go. Put my flaps down and gained a bunch of altitude again, but lost some speed. Again, with flaps, you're going to trade altitude or lift, I should say, for speed. The wing's a lot less efficient right now, but it generates more lift. But since the wind is free, we don't really care about efficiency as much as if we had a powered aircraft. And there we go, landed on the ground there. Let's try once more. So I'll put the flaps in, see if we can gain some altitude here. There we go. It's a little bit better than before, perhaps. Okay, so give it a couple shots there. See what the flaps do for you as you're flying around. See what you might want to do with your FT Explorer, perhaps. If you want to put flaps on it or not, or flapper-ons or whatever you might be interested in. And just give it a shot. Go ahead and get that 60 seconds in the air at least, and submit that for your assignment. Thanks.